is a 5-story
walkway. This is my walkway.
Yep. Oh, wow. They done already tore down my mother's house.
Our house is gone, babe.
is a 5-story building with a parking garage underneath. And the first floor will be concrete walls with like a CVS or a Walgreens, a grocery store, all that kind of stuff.
I lived here, so yeah, I hope it could be my grocery store.
It seems to me that the evolution of U.S. cities always happens on the back of black communities.
If people knew how amazing Barry Farms in Anacostia was back then, they would see a lot of stuff differently.
Barry Farm to me was like one big old grandma house.
It was called Barry Farms because in that whole area around there were the remnants of what were a whole series of farms. That whole area out there was bought by the federal government, you know, when they bought it from this man Barry.
We know Barry Farm as a public housing project, but Barry Farm was indeed an actual plantation.
When the Civil War started, slavery was legal in Washington, D.C. It was as legal here as it was in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. And any place else in the country, there were slaves everywhere. They were being bought and sold within 3 or 4 blocks of the Capitol.
The original L'Enfant Plan of Washington, D.C., the boundaries to the north, including what we know as Florida Avenue now, that was Washington City. The diamond, specifically what we can think of as Washington, D.C., was considered Washington County, and it was more rural. The Barry that we know from Barry Farm, he had a farm that he cultivated on the other side of the Anacostia River. We have to understand the history of Barry and Barry Farm as a slave-owning planter in Washington, D.C. That's who he was, and his name is still on the land. Washington, D.C. emancipated enslaved people before the end of the Civil War. By the end of the 1860s, you have this kind of country land around the city that used to be worked by enslaved people. It's no longer being worked by the folks who toiled the land.
With the nation engulfed in civil war, Washington became a beacon for enslaved people. Many were arrested, and some returned to bondage. Yet, the migration continued. In 1861, the Evening Star wrote, "Most of the slaves have expressed themselves to the effect that they thought they would be free if they could get to Washington."
Before, during, and after the Civil War, African Americans poured into Washington, at least 40,000 to 50,000 people that came in. Of course, it was very difficult for them to find housing. Many of them were living on the streets and in poorly built housing.
Black people being in other parts of the district where white folks at the time didn't really want black people in their neighborhood.
After the Civil War, the Freedmen's Bureau decided that one of the things they could do was to buy some land and create a neighborhood, a settlement.
General Oliver Otis Howard met with some of those black families to talk about what they wanted to do or how they wanted to address this issue. And they said they wanted land, right? The opportunity to build a life for themselves. Through the Freedmen's Bureau, they purchased a large plot of land separated from where a lot of the other white communities were to give these black people, these freed black people, an opportunity to build their lives.
In 1867, the Freedmen's Bureau purchased 375 acres of farmland from the Barry family. It was divided into plots that would be sold to formerly enslaved people.
I know we always hear about the idea of 40 acres and a mule, but this wasn't even that. This was people who purchased the land, right? They weren't given the land. Why do these folks even have to buy this land in the first place? I still feel like it was really their birthright to be able to be landowners, because that was one of the many things that had been denied them for so long, even though they worked the land themselves.
Gold mine.